The heroine of our story was sitting opposite the man. It was Duke Taran. The common people referred to this person as impotent. Ian Theron was one of the 3 dukes in the country in which the events described here will develop. He was the emperor's cousin on the female side, and the people loved and respected him. Our heroine set herself up for the positive, that she can handle it. Although she was a little scared, after all she had no way back, and it was already too late to retreat. The girl knew all the pros and cons, because this was her second life, and the choice of Duke Taran was not accidental. He asked if she was the Duchess of Parnell, tilting his head slightly to the right. The man looked quite attractive, blonde with blue eyes, tall, straight, open gaze, broad shoulders, dignified. The girl became nervous and unconsciously began to wrinkle the hem of her skirt, clenching her fists. She replied that there were no more. Her face was tense and her voice was firm. The girl began to smile and introduced herself as Olivia Florence, and flirtingly asked to call her Lady Florence. The man was surprised, and he asked the girl to clarify. After all, she seems to be married to the Duke of Parnell. The girl actually already wore the bride's dress at the Duke of Parnell's wedding. Olivia answered with narrowed eyes that James Parnell was the nastiest bastard in the world, that man traded his own wife on the battlefield for the next 10 years, that after that she could not call him husband. Moreover, according to imperial law, if there was no wedding night after the wedding, then such people cannot be considered full-fledged spouses. The man carefully placed the cup and saucer on the table. The girl continued her remarks, that she didn't even see her husband's face. At the same time, the lady sipped her tea decorously. She placed her cup on the table with force and a distinctive sound, demonstrating her indignation. The girl began to smile radiantly. She said that for this reason she could still call herself Lady Florence. The man clearly enjoyed this. He praised the girl for her courage. Duke Theron nevertheless switched to a businesslike tone. He asked what was the reason for Olivia's visit to him. The girl's face fell a little. The girl asked if he had heard the song that spread throughout all the streets of the city. He clarified, chuckling, that this is the song You and I Stuck Together. It was a song about nudity. Lady Florence noted to herself that the Duke was quite straightforward. The girl said that this song complicates her life. Therefore, she wanted the Duke to take responsibility. The man couldn't understand. How could he take responsibility? He didn't quite understand what the girl was getting at. The girl jumped up from the sofa. She stood in front of the man like a tightrope. The girl was beaming. She confidently urged the man to marry her. The Duke was taken aback by such a statement from a woman. A few months ago, the morning awakening of its inhabitants began in the majestic castle. The girl looked out the window. She realized that that day had come. She loudly began to call Masha, her maid. But she couldn't understand anything what was happening. The girl remained in bed. But after looking around, she could not find anyone. She was amazed by the interior of the room. She rubbed her eyes to see everything better, and make sure that she didn't imagine it while she was asleep. This was decorating rooms when she was 20 years old, and she couldn't understand why she was here. The girl rang the bell. She understood that she needed to hurry. After all, it was time to get ready for a banquet in honor of her birthday. She sat in bed for a while, but no one ran to her. She rang the bell again, and again there was no sound of the maid's hurrying feet. The girl already rang the bell with rage, almost tearing the cord off the bell. And she couldn't understand what was happening around her. Olivia held her head. She couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. And where does her maid wear it? She opened the door and loudly called the maid's name. A frail figure in a maid's uniform hurried down the stairs upon hearing the call of her mistress. The maid Marie stood trembling before her mistress Olivia. She asked if she called her. The girl obligingly bowed as a sign of submission. Olivia was indignant. She asked what was going on. After all, she already called several times. The maid hesitated with her answer, not knowing what to say to her. The lady grabbed Marie by the shoulders and began to shake her. She indignantly asked why the girl suddenly looked younger. Olivia looked at the maid. It really was her Marie. She just looked like she did when she was just hired to be her maid. Our heroine began to smile to herself. She had already decided that she had quietly gone crazy and had simply gone crazy. She told the maid that she was tired of waiting for her, and she ordered me to make her some mint tea. Maid Marie was at a loss. How could she be expected? And is she really being asked to make tea? Olivia asked if the girl saw anyone else nearby. Then in the distance, the sound of approaching steps was heard. A woman's authoritative voice asked, "Why make a fuss at such an early time?" Olivia Florence could never forget that familiar voice. But she was at that woman's funeral. It was Rose Parnell. It was indeed the voice of her first mother-in-law. But she died about 10 years ago. Madame Rosaline. Mother, escaped the girl's lips. Madame imperiously corrected the girl to call her Madame Parnell. The domineering lady's face was distorted by a grimace of displeasure. On the other hand, another lady was asking. She mentioned the holy saints and was interested in who was making so much noise early in the morning. The girl's surprise grew more and more. The lady said she had a migraine, and her head is about to split open. It was the second mother-in-law, Duchess Wine. Our heroine still couldn't understand. How did these two end up here? She began to guess what was happening, but this was not within the scope of normal in any way. And then another painfully familiar voice was heard. Our heroine narrowed her eyes. The voice asked who was making noise since the morning. The formidable lady verbally threatened to kill the noisemaker, and I wanted to see him immediately. This was the third mother-in-law, the Duchess Ignoramus. Our heroine began to chuckle to herself, and the maid stood behind her and prayed for the salvation of her soul and body from this hell. Olivia tried as hard as she could to deny the obvious, but everything turned out to be quite real. Old interior decoration of rooms, all three mothers-in-law. This simply couldn't happen, but she seems to be back in her 20s. It rained that day after returning. Many drops rustled through the leaves of the garden and knocked on the roof of the building. A girl in morning clothes looked out the window. She saw many other people under umbrellas. She took off her leather gloves and put them on the table. Out of fatigue, she plopped down on the couch closest to her. Her back was aching and her head was just pounding. Someone was banging on the door of the room with frantic force. The girl could not understand who else was brought there. After all, she wasn't expecting anyone. Loud, heavy, and hurried footsteps were heard along the corridor. The maid screamed and asked the man to stop. She was very frightened by what was happening. The man's face was covered in blood. When the maid saw this, she was in a state of horror. The man did not pay attention to the horrified maids. He opened the door forcefully. It creaked from the strong pressure. Olivia turned her head toward the door at the sound of footsteps, and she saw a man entering her. It was her husband, Duke James Parnell, head of House Parnell. Our heroine was extremely surprised at the appearance of her husband. She even opened her mouth in surprise. The middle-aged lady at the table called for silence with a short sound. She said that there was nothing surprising. After all, the girl had no manners at all because apparently she had not been taught this before. The lady accused the girl of allowing herself to fly in the clouds in the presence of her elders. The girl smilingly addressed the lady as Mom. The lady was furious. She asked the girl not to call her that, but to call her Duchess of Parnell. Our heroine frowned. She tried to put on a menacing appearance. The girl replied that in that case her mother should also address her as the Duchess of Parnell. The lady knitted her eyebrows in surprise. She asked me to repeat it, otherwise she couldn't hear it well. The girl, all beaming, told those sitting at the table that she is now the wife of the head of this family, and since he's at war, then part of his responsibilities falls on her fragile female shoulders. The girl deliberately clinked her cutlery loudly. She said that her mother did not take her into account and treat her like a servant, and at the same time he also complains about the lack of respect for himself. The lady was taken aback. She always knew that the girl was capable of harsh statements, but today it was already in excess. She called the girl boorish. Our heroine sat pleased with herself. It was like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She smiled to herself and sipped decorously from her glass. The other lady started yelling at the girl. She was simply shocked. The lady tried to convey to the girl with her scream that she has no right to call the Duke he in conversation, even among her family. But Olivia defended her position. She answered that everything was simple, that he is her husband, and nothing is more obvious. The lady swung her fist at the girl. She screamed how dare she talk to her in such a tone. But our Olivia calmly sipped from her glass as if nothing had happened. An elderly lady sitting nearby covered her ears with her hands, hiding from the decibels of screaming. She said that she could not start eating because of ringing in her ears, and she asked me to be quieter. The blonde covered her ears and spoke, that this kind of thing starts every time precisely because of the girl's hatred of them. Olivia thought that the lady was already 40 years old. She would be the same age as her, and I couldn't understand where there was so much infantilism in that one. The girl invited the infantile lady to go up to her room and enjoy her meal in splendid isolation. Our heroine narrowed her eyes and spoke, that the lady seems to be already an adult, and I still haven't learned to talk without whining. Like a little child, really. The lady was already starting to get seriously upset. Tears welled up in her eyes. She couldn't understand how someone could say something like that to her. Olivia sat at the head of the table. Opposite her sat a lady who was the first to make harsh remarks to the girl. The second lady who spoke continued to scream fiercely, and the third one whined loudly. The Duchess spoke as if to herself, that the girl is truly out of her mind. At the same time, she ceremoniously wiped her face with a napkin. Olivia boldly answered that it was not she who went crazy, that she just had to put everything in its place sooner or later. The girl stood up. She leaned her hands on the table. She stated in a decisive tone that since the Duke of Parnell is not here, her words and actions are much more significant than others. Therefore, she urged me to adhere to the limits of decency. She asked the Duchess, who called her Mama, to transfer financial management to her. The lady frowned. She answered that she would not listen to any nonsense. Another lady joined in the altercation. She twirled her finger at her temple, claiming that the girl will remain an uncouth hillbilly until the end of her days. And how can she even be trusted to manage the Duke's finances? Our heroine reminded the ladies sitting at the table that they should be aware that she studied at the academy with a major in accounting. And in this case, she was going to do without their permission. Olivia called loudly to the butler. He quickly found himself nearby, bowing slightly as a sign of readiness to listen to the mistress's orders. The girl asked that all the Duke's documents be brought to her room immediately, and later find another room where she could view the necessary documentation. Madame Mom also shouted, "Butler!" banging on the table with her fist and attracting his attention. She ordered the girl to take her words back immediately. Otherwise, she promised not to leave it so easily. Olivia asked the butler to think about it. Who will stay in the Duke's house longer? He began to wipe the sweat on his face that came out from the nervous tension he had experienced. But after thinking a little, the man answered that he will clarify this issue with Mr. Duke personally. At the same time, politely and decorously bowing to both ladies to stasis. The second lady said it was a very bad idea to bother her son, who is fighting hard for the county. She was very serious and showed her rather big fist. The mother lady grinned in support of the words of the previous remark. Olivia was defeated in a verbal battle with the Titans. The girl left the dining room, creaking the door, and she immediately hurriedly went to the office. She opened her desk drawer and took out a piece of paper and an ink pen to write on. The girl was indignant that the older ladies decided to show her who's boss. She wanted to show that they were not the only ones writing to the Duke, and she is also free to do the same to herself. Our heroine hastily scribbled a letter on paper to her husband, who was on military duty far from home. In the military barracks there was drill training and review of combat personnel. A stockade surrounded the perimeter. The watchmen stood guard at guard posts. The man received a letter from his wife. It began with kind words addressed to him. She asked her to forgive her for distracting him with the topic of household chores. She complained that she was not allowed to conduct business affairs. In the letter, she complained about her difficult life, inconvenient living conditions, suitable only for servants. The girl asked if her husband would have time to take action on this issue. She would be willing to take on the responsibility of doubling the Duke's fortune before he returned home. She promised that it would not be just property, but something that would bring income in the future. She expressed the hope that he would take her side this time for the sake of peace in the family. I wished for his speedy return. The man folded the letter from his wife Olivia into 3 folds and put it back in the envelope. A pale moon shone down on him through the window. It was already the dead of night. Everything around was asleep. The man was sitting on the bed and holding his wife's letter in his left hand. He was deep in thought. 3 duchesses lived in the Duke of Parnell's mansion. The Duchess Wine was the second mother-in-law. The third mother-in-law was the biological mother of Olivia's husband, the Duchess Ignorant. And there was another lady, the first mother-in-law, an elegant duchess who seized power through conspiracies. She had the greatest influence on the Duke. As soon as Olivia got married, she received many gifts from her mother-in-law. The girl in her second life, returning to her 20s, was very indignant. The head of the Parnell family left this house in a deplorable state. The walls were moldy and crumbling. The roof was leaking. The premises required urgent repairs. Therefore, Olivia decided to protect her and her family's peace. She put things in order and kept it clean. She also managed the mansion's staff. The maids whispered, discussing the activity and thriftiness of the young mistress. Our heroine walked quietly to herself, humming something. She was very pleased with herself today. Just the thought of what visited her today made her smile. The butler called out to her. He said that a reply letter had arrived from the Duke, and he handed her an envelope with an official seal. At first, the girl was surprised and even delighted at such a quick response from her husband. But after reading the first lines of the message, she was very upset. Her husband wrote to her to tell her not to make noise at home, and she obeyed his mother's. Olivia was furious and forcefully crumpled the paper of the letter. She didn't expect this from her husband. From afar, she called her husband a bastard, screaming as if he could hear her. And from the excess of emotions that overwhelmed her, she tore the letter into small pieces. Our heroine could not imagine that her husband remained the same as in her previous life. She realized that the James of the past was the same as her James of the past. Olivia realized that she was doomed, but that didn't suit her at all. She was determined. She understood that her life was ruined. These 3 duchesses, her husband's mothers, will probably not let her breathe calmly in this house. The next morning was frosty and the sky was clear. It was very cold in the Duke's castle. No one lit a fire in the fireplace, so there was no coal visible. The flowers in the vase have withered, and there was only 1 loaf of bread on the table. Our heroine lay in her own bed, covering her head with a blanket and shivering from the cold. She cursed at the living conditions in which she had to live for a long time. Her mothers-in-law seemed to be very petty people, and rebellion against the 3 of them was worthless. The girl went down to the basement with a lantern in her hands. The girl collected more firewood and carried it into the living room to light the fireplace and warm up at least a little. After losing the real war for power, she was now afraid of being subjected to the terrible treatment of her mothers-in-law. Having lit a fire, the girl warmed up a little, and now she could drown out the feeling of hunger with a piece of bread. She began to cut herself a slice from the whole loaf with a knife. Our heroine realized that she was now punished for her excessive arrogance. Cutting the bread in half, she thought, should she even continue to live with this hopeless man? Olivia stared at the cut of the half of the bread for a moment. Then, in a rage, she threw it away from her. She was not going to put up with the injustice happening in her life. Suddenly, the door to her room swung open. The ignorant duchess appeared on the threshold. The expression on her face did not bode well for the girl. The lady began to advance on the girl in a threatening position. She was clearly going to attack her and humiliate her personality once again. The mother-in-law started yelling at Olivia. What a lazy daughter-in-law in the world. She said that all the mothers-in-law had already woken up early and were doing business. She blamed the girl for still lying in her bed. The ignorant duchess threatened the girl, pointing her finger at her, that she would soon be thrown out of this house. And she herself was the reason for this. This will happen immediately after her husband James returns home. Olivia stood up abruptly and yelled back. But then I thought a little. She weighed the facts she already knew. Does she need a second life next to James? The girl took a breath, doing a breathing exercise to restore her breathing. She took her mother-in-law's hand. Smiling, she said that Mother, as expected, was simply a genius. After all, she gave the girl the right solution to her problems. The ignorant duchess did not understand at all what was happening to her daughter-in-law. She was confused and didn't even know how to respond to her words of gratitude and praise. But our heroine has already set up a plan for herself, and James Parnell should have been out of her life as soon as possible. Everything must end between them. She smiled at herself and at her brilliant solution. A sunbeam danced on the estate's garden path. There was a clear sound of women's heels. It was our Olivia who was in a hurry to thoroughly change her life once and for all. She thought better in the fresh air. She began to think about how best to get a divorce. Everyone knew that James Parnell was the shield and sword of the empire. His family served the state for more than 100 years. But by this time, only one man remained in the successful family. The girl picked a rose flower and enjoyed its aroma and her thoughts. A good reason was needed to send James Parnell to the battlefield. That's why he got married, so that it wouldn't be a problem. And Olivia was chosen as the bride of Duke James of Parnell. And that's only because she was born on the same day. Our heroine was tearing out her hair. She could not figure out how to dissolve this unwanted marriage with his lordship. The girl was sitting right on the garden path with a rose flower in her hand. She wasn't going to give up just like that. While thinking about finding a solution, she tore the petals from the flower. Olivia wondered if she could go against the will of His Majesty the Emperor. After all, she couldn't say that her husband was impotent. Rose petals lay next to the girl's feet. She clenched her lips, but a solution still did not come to her mind. Her James wasn't like that. She became sad, remembering the sweet moments of their love affairs. The girl was surprised. She knew that the Duke had a cousin very similar to him. 2 days later, there was a ball. The musicians played instruments. The gentlemen circled their chosen ones in the dance. One girl spoke to the other, that she should be careful. Another replied that her friend should not worry. The girl spun around sharply with a glass of wine in her hand immediately behind the back of the man in white clothes. Her glass fell and broke with a characteristic sound. The girl let out a characteristic, "Ah." The man turned his attention to her. He asked if she was okay. I asked her to be careful. He held him tightly by the forearm. The man introduced himself as Yang. He was a blue-eyed blonde with broad shoulders and an athletic build. His clothes were appropriate for his high rank. It was Ian Tyrone. Everyone around was chatting about their own things. Some of them observed a couple holding hands. The girl made a surprised face. This was her chance to get his attention, which was ultimately her goal today. She pressed herself close to the man. She complained that she felt dizzy. He was a little surprised. The girl smiled. She asked the man to hug her like on that hot night. The couple stood in plain sight. People around were surprised what these two were doing. And what is happening here and now? The man pushed the girl's hand away. He told her he wasn't going to hug her. His face did not express any emotion. The girl's face was long in surprise. After an accidental hug with a girl, the man's groin area remained flat. The ladies were amazed at the lack of reaction of the man's body to a woman's embrace. Since then, he has been nicknamed impotent. Olivia was sad. She was aware that she did not have the impudence to remarry. The man is tired of everything, and she didn't know how she could get such a cold man. The girl took the door handle with her hand, intending to open it. Music was playing. She knew this song by heart. It was the maid on the top floor humming a song. Olivia really liked it, and it was very good for her. After all the inhabitants of the empire liked that song, and street performers earned very good money from performing it. Although, as a rule, they used to sing about various celebrities of the country, Olivia decided that she absolutely had to write a song. It was supposed to be a love lyric that gets stuck in people's heads. A few days later, a white carriage drawn by a pair of white horses was driving through the streets of the city. On the street, peasant children sang songs at the top of their lungs. They sang about the Duchess of Parnell, who cannot stand being alone. The children continued to sing that every night she burns with mental anguish, that it's stuffy and she opens the window. The ladies nearby were surprised and delighted at the melodic children's performance of a new folk song of the streets. The carriage was driving along the street. The horses' hooves made a characteristic tigedic sound, and the song continued to be heard on the street, believing that no one is watching her. A young man sat in the carriage and listened to the song from the street. But suddenly a mysterious lover came, Romeo Alcesus. The man in the carriage was asking his servant if he had sent the letter to Olivia. Another man with glasses, bowing decorously, answered, "Yes." He mentally answered the girl that he did what she asked him to do. But he was afraid that the backlash would come too quickly. Olivia received a letter from him and smiled. This was her best friend. It is he who will later become the head of this country. It was Romeo Alcesus. It was thanks to the appearance of minstrels sponsored by Count Alcesus that Olivia's song became so popular. Immediately after writing that song, it became a hit among the people and spread throughout the world. And now there was not a person among the inhabitants of the empire who did not know about this song. Duchess Parnell cannot stand being alone, Olivia heard from around the corner. Every night she burns with mental anguish. She feels stuffy and opens the window. The girl heard the maid humming. Our heroine wrote on a piece of paper. She told herself that she definitely had a talent for lyricism, and if everything works out, you can write another song later. The girl smiled at herself and her idea. She thought that she could write songs about her mother-in-law and her sisters, imagining them as little birds. The girl began to giggle into her fist. She started writing a letter, so that Romeo doesn't worry, that everything turns out the way she planned and she really wants it. The girl wrote that she was living in hell. Her mother-in-law offends her, beats her, and humiliates her. And divorce is not the worst thing for her. On the contrary, the best thing she can do now to save herself. She thanked the man in the letter for asking her. And she signed, "Your friend Olivia." The girl was now looking forward to Duke Yang's arrival. 3 days later, the screams of the mothers-in-law were again heard from the castle. The ignorant duchess called Olivia a fucking sissy, and she asked how the hell she managed to do that such a song was walking through the streets. The girl shrank from cold and fear, But it was all her doing. She was already mentally prepared for this. She said that she did not understand what her mother-in-law was talking about, and she reminded me that she had not left her room for several days in a row. The girl asked the lady to calm down, and she assured, smiling, that she didn't understand what made her so angry. The Duchess snatched the blanket from Olivia's hands and threw her onto the bed. She screamed that she couldn't calm down, since her son's name was tarnished by such crap as a shameless wench. The girl asked what she had to do with it. She played the innocent victim very skillfully, and she skillfully pretended that she was not aware of the songs on the street. She had round eyes and a surprised face. She asked what was going on. The ignorant Duchess silently looked at the girl for a while, pursing her lips. Then it turned out that today at the tea party in which they participated, it was discussed among the wives of the nobles. New song that came out recently. The lady abruptly turned away from the girl. The ladies at the table asked if anyone had heard the song about Parnell. They said that there were such rumors. The Duchess wanted to clarify what the rumors were about, and the ladies vied with each other to answer that Miss was secretly dating Duke Tyrone. Duchess Mama clutched her heart, and she dropped the cup from what she heard. Our heroine made an innocent face. She claimed that these were just rumors and should not be paid attention to such things at all. She said she didn't know anything, and she admitted the possibility of Duke Tyrone's involvement in this. The ignorant Duchess shouted that the girl was a walking misunderstanding and a giver. She threatened to freeze her to death. The mother-in-law asked the girl, how is she going to look her son in the eyes if that song spreads throughout the empire? That her son is on the battlefield, that his wife should be encouraging, and now he has to carry this burden for the rest of his life. Olivia motioned with her hand to stop and stop yelling at her. She said that this is not normal. How can such rumors circulate when she is in this room all the time? The girl suggested that perhaps she should meet with Duke Tyrone and discuss all this with him face to face. There was a letter on the table. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Aramir, Ian Tyrone. The girl was pleased with herself. She encouraged herself that if she doubted, he would not believe her. Aramir was the most famous place in the capital that could be found. This would be the best place for Ian to dispel stupid rumors. But it was an unfavorable situation for the girl. She realized this when looking at herself in the mirror. Romeo was also very worried about this. After all, His Majesty the Emperor also mentioned this rumor during the tournament. Our heroine understood all the upcoming difficulties. But she didn't want to live another 20 years of her life in this hell again. She was still looking at her reflection in the mirror. Our heroine determined herself that she could convince Duke Ian Tyrone. The servant reported to the Duke that he had conveyed a message to the Duchess of Parnell. He turned his head to the servant. He looked pleased. He answered, "Excellent." The carriage rolled quickly down the street. A pair of horses were tapping the characteristic tigidick with their horseshoes. People saw a flag on the carriage. He was recognizable to everyone. People on the street were whispering. This was the flag of the Duke of Parnell. Our heroine was leaving the carriage door. The servant offered her his hand. The people in the crowd continued to whisper. They said that this was the Duchess from the rumors. Why is it that they sing a song about her on every corner? Olivia was pleased. The common people were chatting about her behind her back. She was sure that the people would figure everything out on their own. And she had experience in such matters. And people said about her that she was arrogant, did not know her place, and behaved provocatively. Olivia felt a little sad, but she understood that such an experience could be useful to her at times. Aramir's hall was amazing. He was all shining with crystal. The staircase was lined with carpet. The employee was holding a menu in his hands. He asked the timid girl if she had a table reserved. Our heroine confirmed that there is a reservation, but it's in the name of Ian Tyrone. The man, hearing the calm response from the guests of the establishment, invited her to follow him. The man walked Olivia along the tables, and the vacationing people looked over their shoulders at the girl passing by and whispered. The girl was surprised at how luxurious the place was chosen by the Duke for their meeting. A soft sofa and a pair of armchairs surrounded a stylized handmade table. The employee said that the Count was not yet there, and he invited the girl to make herself more comfortable. Our heroine asked how much it cost to order tea. The employee asked again. Olivia screamed, pointing her finger at him to stop him from making her repeat herself twice. The employee lowered his eyes to the floor and said that they have 6 types of tea, selected by their masters. And he offered the girl the menu of the establishment. Olivia took the book with the menu from the waiter's hands. She was pleased with the impression she made on the employee and the people around her. She took the opportunity to drink tea to her heart's content. I started to get acquainted with the restaurant menu. She first asked to bring her fruit tea. Then she asked for tea with flower petals. Later, more pu'eri tea. Olivia enjoyed herself. And I told myself that it's just wonderful to drink good tea. The girl called the administrator. He hurriedly approached the noble guest of the establishment. But then a man in a white suit approached her and sat down next to her. She moved to another sofa opposite him. She turned to the man smiling. But she kept her hands locked, which showed some tension and closeness from her interlocutor. That she had heard rumors about him. But she didn't think he was so rude to others. Duke Ian Tyrone himself sat in front of the girl. He clarified that she is the same Duchess of Parnell. The man sat with his chin on his fist and admired the girl openly without hiding his emotions. 3 days ago, a carriage drawn by a pair of white horses rolled down the street. A man in a white coat robe moved with long steps along the spacious corridor. The servant bowed low to the newcomer and greeted him decorously. And then he knocked on the door with his knuckles and informed His Majesty that Duke Tyrone has arrived. The man entered. They were very happy to see him. The mustachioed blonde embraced the long-awaited guest in his vice-like embrace, addressed him, "Dear younger brother." The man struggled to escape from the tight embrace, and he pulled away from the man hugging her. And His Majesty said that even if everyone believes those terrible rumors, then he didn't believe them, because he knew his brother was not like that. Ian Tyrone was surprised. He asked his brother what he was talking about. His Majesty said that he had heard rumors, that Ian has a girlfriend. The Duke grabbed his head. He asked what kind of nonsense and false rumors his brother was collecting. He asked his brother, was it not he who personally gave the Duchess of Parnell in marriage? But His Majesty retorted that anything could be cancelled by his decree. The head of the empire claimed that the Duke was now at war, and even if the girl divorces him, he probably won't come here. Therefore, you should not pay attention to it at all. Yang briefly said that he was not interested. He meant this whole story in general and the girl at the head specifically. His Majesty made a serious face. He drew the interlocutor's attention to the fact that it was worth thinking about this issue. He said that there is nothing like that in marriage. That both of them spend a lot of time together. They hate each other or they love each other. How lucky is anyone? He was looking out the window at a couple of birds on a branch in the garden. His Majesty asked to look at his example. After all, he chose his wife because they shared the same birthday. And now he and his wife have a very good relationship. And if the husband behaves inappropriately, in the future the wives will come to terms with this and move on with their lives. Ian Tyrone pursed his lips and thought about his older brother's position in life. But after thinking about it, he replied that he was fine as is, and he doesn't need any relationship at all. His Majesty began to lose his temper. He asked his brother in a raised tone of surprise, that he's just going to ignore the rumors? Ian Tyrone replied that the girl from the rumors was too strange, and he didn't understand her train of thought. His Majesty guessed that the girl very bravely tried to destroy the marriage of convenience, which was concluded under the pressure of his command. He began to respect such a girl for her intelligence, creativity, and courage. He asked his brother to meet that girl just once. He hugged her by the shoulders and very convincingly said something else in a low voice in her ear. Duke Tyrone argued that despite all His Majesty's arguments, he did not want to do so. But the Emperor cheerfully retorted that the brave girl wanted it. And if we talk about the Emperor, he gives his consent. Ian agreed that he would meet with that girl. But when they meet, he will refuse her. Therefore, at the present time, a meeting between Ian Tyrone and Olivia Parnell Florence took place in the Aramira Hall. The girl very confidently offered the Duke to marry her. The man still couldn't understand. What the hell is wrong with this girl? The man looked thoughtfully at the girl. He now realized what his crowned brother meant when he said that the girl was very brave. After all, it was rare for anyone to take him by surprise like this. The girl was surprised by the man's reaction. He clarified with the girl that it did not matter to her that he was called impotent, and she answered that, on the contrary, everything suits her. The girl answered laughing, that all those bed scenes remind her of dragonflies, and she really doesn't like those insects. The man asked her to stop this useless conversation, and she retorted to him that he also had a bad sense of humor. The girl thought that Yang would immediately get angry at her caustic answers, but he turned out to be much more patient. A man with a sad face told the girl that he was not talkative, boring and indifferent to people. He said he didn't know what Olivia expected from him, but I wanted to warn her that she would be disappointed in him. But our heroine thought to herself that she was already too old for all sorts of fantasies, and she smiled imperceptibly to herself. And if you think about it, her husband James wasn't exactly talkative to her either. It seemed to her that the number of words spoken by Yang now was equal to the number of words spoken on topics in a week. Sometimes a girl looking at her husband thought that he was made of stone. Our heroine, laughing a little, assured the Duke that she lived all the time as a lonely girl. So she suggested that he think carefully. The girl asked questions. Does the Duke have any other relatives besides the Emperor? He said that His Highness was his only relative. Then the girl began to urge him to marry her. The man shuddered. Olivia continued to take the lead in the conversation. She claimed that she had already calculated everything, and that's why he offers it to him. This wasn't a joke. She urged him to marry her. Duke Jan Theron turned his face away from the girl sitting opposite him. He was in a state of reverie. Therefore, the girl's chances should increase in view of the above. His Majesty must have said that his brother had the only girl for whom he was sexually attracted. And if the song and rumors reached His Highness, he would certainly approve of his marriage with Duke Tyrone. All that remained was to convince the Duke himself, and Olivia was determined. She started crying loudly, that it turns out she was just a toy for him in the hands of a dishonest man. People sitting nearby began to look around at them and whisper in surprise, pointing to the arguing couple. The man resolutely covered the girl's mouth with his hand. He wanted her to finally shut up. Olivia noticed that his hands were so soft, not like her James had. She mentally scolded herself for comparing her idiot husband to a Duke of Imperial blood. The man called her to silence, saying a short but significant shh. Duke Yang spoke while standing in front of the girl. He claimed that she had already embarrassed him so many times in such a short time. But his face remained indifferent. The man held his head in thought. He suggested that they talk in a more private setting. They occupied a private office where they were the only ones. The employee of this establishment wished them a pleasant time. The girl stopped him with a hand sign, and she asked me to bring her Earl Grey tea for a snack. The waiter bowed obligingly as he took her order. The girl joked that such tea would be perfect for a snack, and Duke Yang watched her carefully. He remarked out loud that she liked local tea, and the girl quipped that this is the only thing that makes her happy here. There was a pause between them for some time. Everyone thought about their own things. Olivia started to smile. She once again proposed to marry her. The man asked her to stop repeating it. The Duke looked depressed and sad. The girl didn't even imagine that he could be like that. She certainly noticed at general events that Ian Tyrone was serious beyond his years. The girl fell in love with the Duke. She thought it was good to be young. Although the man continued to sulk at her, she replied that she would stop repeating only after his consent. Duke Ian Tyrone asked the girl, why did her choice fall on him? That the girl really wanted to marry him just because of that song. He just couldn't understand. What forced the girl to take such extreme measures? Our heroine decided not to retreat one step towards her goal. She replied that she had already told him everything, that she's in really big trouble now because of that song, that her 3 mothers-in-law are very angry, that now it's better to turn all these rumors into reality. The man could not accept the girl's position. He asked what, and these were all the reasons. Our heroine was very militant. She asked if the Duke could have at least one such mother-in-law. The Duke averted his eyes and turned away from the girl altogether. He apologized for his rudeness. The girl mercifully forgave him. She gently took his large hand with both hands. She spoke, looking into his eyes. What she really likes is that he doesn't have such protective parents. She said that she also liked his taciturnity and lack of interest in women. And she was also completely satisfied with his inability in bed with girls. There was sincerity in her every word. The girl said that this is why he must definitely marry her. The man sat with his face turned away from the lovely girl. He was both upset and puzzled by everything that had previously been said to him. Olivia started screaming. She urged the man to answer her quickly. The waiter was already carrying the tea the girl ordered. She did not let go of the man's hand, and she asked her to forgive her. When the tea was brought, the girl sat back on the sofa and clasped her hands. The waiter brought her order and, with a characteristic sound, placed it on the table in front of the guests of the establishment. On the table there was a pair of hand-painted porcelain cups and a teapot included. Olivia poured herself some tea. Wow, how restless she was in her soul. She was terribly nervous. Duke Tyrone remarked out loud that the girl clearly liked this tea. Olivia replied that it was not her favorite, but it was still good. She poured a cup for Duke John, too. She suggested that he try it. He agreed. Olivia was surprised and delighted at the same time. The man drank all the tea in his cup in large gulps. The man abruptly put the empty cup on the saucer with a characteristic sound. He extended his hand to the girl with an offer to marry him. Olivia was simply taken aback by this turn of events. The man said that he was tired of listening to the same thing. The girl listened to him with her mouth open in surprise. Olivia asked if she should have returned home and waited for news from him. The man asked where she was going to return and what she was talking about. The girl could not accept such a drastic turn of events. Ian said that if they decided to get married, then why would she return to the Parnell estate? The Duke suggested that the girl just go to his house now. Olivia stood in front of him, frozen with her mouth open in surprise. In the rays of the setting sun, Duke Tyrone's estate looked magnificent. The girl modestly sat in the living room on the edge of the sofa. She folded her hands modestly in her lap. Now she was no longer in control of the situation around her. Everything happened much faster than she expected. She couldn't answer herself how it all turned out this way, and the maids were already whispering outside the door. But this did not bother our heroine at all. After all, the girl herself did not expect such a rapid development of events, and the servants were generally simply impressed by this news. The girl certainly behaved with dignity, but the Duke was not simple either. He was simply great. Even though everything didn't go as the girl had planned, still the weight of sorrow seemed to have been lifted from her shoulders. She looked at the interior of the guest room with curiosity. She promised herself that as soon as she became a duchess, she would immediately begin rearranging this living room. The door creaked behind the girl. She turned towards the sound. The man asked her to wait a little longer. After all, her appearance was sudden. Therefore, the room was not prepared in advance. The girl assured that there was no need to bother so much, and she will be able to sleep for a while just on the sofa in the living room. She claimed that the sofa was much softer and more comfortable than the straw on which she had been habitually sleeping lately. At the same time, she unconsciously received pleasure from touching the upholstery of the sofa with her hand. She claimed her room was more of a dump thanks to the damn Parnell family. Our heroine covered her ears with her hands. She told herself that her past life would not happen again. Duke Ian Tyrone was amazed to see the girl in such a state of blissful trance. He said he wasn't familiar with the rules at the Parnell house, but as the owner of his house, he could not allow the girl to huddle on the sofa at night. Olivia began to smile brightly. She stated that in this case she could sleep in the same bed with him. But seeing the expression on the man's face and his involuntary flinch, the girl realized that he was unlikely to allow them to sleep in the same bed. The man's face became sad again, and the girl thought that he was cleverly pretending to be an adult, although he looked more like a naive 20-year-old child. The Duke asked the girl, was she really not at all bothered by the fact that he had erectile dysfunction? Olivia assured him that she did not want to have children, that she doesn't feel an ounce of love for them. That's why she doesn't plan to give birth to them at all. In her old life before returning to her 20s, our heroine gave birth to 2 children. This happened during heavy snowfall. The birth was difficult. The girl was dying, and her maternal instinct did not awaken because of this. The midwife told the maid that the woman in labor would take a long time to recover, and she gave the baby into her arms. Olivia was shaking all over, and the maid asked if she wanted to hold the child in her arms, but the woman in labor had no time for that. She was exhausted and sick. The door creaked. The Duke of Parnell entered. The midwife told him that his child was completely healthy, but his wife is in serious condition. The man pulled his hands towards the bundle with the child. Olivia looked really bad, but he only glanced at her from afar. He said to no one that he had urgent business and asked the maid to take care of his wife. He turned around and quickly walked out. The midwife quietly told the maid that this was impossible. After all, how could you leave your wife without even looking at her? She said that she felt sorry for the woman in labor, and Olivia understood that she no longer wanted to go through such torment. She realized that childless women are unhappy in their later years, that she might never see the faces of her children. But she frankly told Duke Tyrone that she absolutely did not want to have children, and she will try very hard to prevent this from happening to her. The girl said that the fact that the man was impotent was even to her advantage. The man looked at her in surprise. Olivia said it was strange to her that he accepted her words so easily. What is very strange to her is that he doesn't need an heir at all. She started pointing her finger at him. She shouldn't have told him about this. But he could suffer significant losses. After all, the more serious the problem, the more attention it needs to be given. The girl, without noticing it, began to grumble like an old woman. But having caught herself in time, she began to grin at herself. The man said that he did not agree with her opinion and words at all, but he just nodded his head. He didn't care what she said at all. Olivia suddenly attacked the Duke. She did not agree that it might not matter whether he had heirs or not. The man retorted that he simply did not want to answer that question. Our heroine was sitting, and in front of her stood a man who was absolutely calm in every sense of the word. She thought to herself, "It seems like he really isn't excited at all." He asked the girl not to look at him like that again, and she answered that he shouldn't come up with anything like that. The man said that the girl had it all written all over her face, that she looked at him as if he were the most pathetic person in the world. But Olivia replied that he understood everything wrong. How can a duke be pitiful? She made eyes at him and folded her lips into a tube and hummed something quietly. And he continued to sulk at her. She asked her to forgive her for her dark humor, but his reaction is so funny. The girl began to smile shyly, looking away to the side. But the girl had a strange feeling, as if someone was approaching her. Opening her eyes, she saw the Duke's face nearby. He was serious and reserved as ever. The man stood over the girl, leaning his hands on the back of the sofa behind her back. The girl could not understand what happened so suddenly, and she noted to herself that the man was simply magnificent. Duke Ian Tyrone asked Olivia, "Where did a girl like her fall on his head?" The man told the girl that now he needs to mind his own business with her permission. He said with a grin that he now had a lot to worry about due to the upcoming wedding. The girl mentally asked him, why does he hang over her and doesn't want to give him normal explanations? The Duke was already leaving. He told Olivia that they would see each other again a little later. The door closed behind the man, and our heroine sat on the living room sofa in confused feelings. She was thinking about what had just happened here. She was beginning to doubt that the Duke was impotent, and she admitted that perhaps these were just rumors. The girl did not believe that a person who had never had an organ could look like such a lustful male. But if you take into account that the man is already 20, and he's still not married, everything that the rumors said about him could be true. The door creaked. A servant entered. He informed the girl, bowing politely to her, that her room is ready. Olivia was beaming. She had not hoped that she would be placed in her personal quarters so quickly. Already at night, when she was sleeping, the Duke of Parnell began to wake her. He asked his dear wife to wake up. He shook her by the shoulder. She looked at the man who woke her and was scared and surprised. He asked her to remain quiet with a characteristic shh. He quickly found himself face to face with her. The man quickly took off his clothes and began to get closer to the girl. He threw her onto the pillow, hugged and caressed her. Olivia asked him to stop, but he could not understand why he was being given a stop signal by the spouse's love attraction. The girl gave the man a resounding slap in the face. He flew back a little from his partner's unexpected aggression. The Duke of Parnell rubbed his bruised cheek. He was upset and surprised by his wife's behavior. He convinced the girl that she could open her mouth and talk, and not to be aggressive at the first opportunity in response, when she just wants to, even without warning. Olivia grabbed his shirt in anger. She screamed in his face that she didn't need to be held by the hand. What turns her off from a man? The girl woke up in the bed of her new room in Duke Tyrone's castle. She was catching her breath. She just had a nightmare. The morning sun was shining through the window, and against the background of a clear sky, birds flew. She clenched her hand into a fist. She rubbed her eyes with her other hand, driving away the remnants of sleep. The day was beginning. The weather was clear. The Duke's palace was beautiful as always. The girl asked the man again, not believing her ears. The man claimed that they would go to the palace today. After all, His Highness the Emperor is waiting for them. The man ceremoniously pushed back his chair to sit down, and our heroine noticed to herself how handsome he was. They knocked on the doors. The Duke ordered to enter. The maids opened the doors and carried dishes to set the breakfast table. The man wished the girl bon appétit, but she was surprised. After all, he recently told her that they needed to go to the palace, and he answered that since they were now spouses, then at least for the first time they can have breakfast together. The girl said that the matter was different. After all, His Majesty is waiting for them. Duke Tyrone replied that everything was fine, and he still offered to have breakfast for them first. But the girl doubted that everything was okay. A completely different image of the Emperor was imprinted in her memory. His Majesty was simply a terrifying man. When Olivia was able to join high society as a duchess, Crown Prince Stathis became emperor. It so happened that the princess ascended the throne at a fairly young age, but the previous emperor did not retire, but remained to help his daughter, so that she could strengthen her position among the nobles and people. The people in the crowd didn't understand. How did a princess become an emperor? After such rejection of his daughter, the emperor began to do terrible and terrible things. The steel in his hands was stained with blood. As a result, a bloody purge was carried out among the nobles. Even Olivia's friend complained about his poor treatment with the previous emperor. The girl realized that it was very good to have a friend like Romeo. He was one in the past and remained one in the present. And the fact that she could now calmly eat delicacies was also the merit of her beloved friend. After all, it was he who then fulfilled her absolutely absurd request to distribute that song. She remembered that in the past, their friendship had almost become a weakness, which various gossips tried to take advantage of. Thanks to the ascension of Emperor Stathis to the throne, Olivia and Romeo still continued to be friends despite the false rumors about them. The girl thought that Emperor Stathis really was a great man. After all, as a duchess, it was already quite difficult for her to manage even with her abnormal family. She sat at the table in deep thought, and she chuckled something under her breath. Duke Yang asked the girl, bringing her out of her thoughts. What would she do if he refused to become her husband? After all, there were so many rumors about her. The song is sung around every corner. What would she do next if she was rejected by the Duke? Olivia replied that she would probably just be thrown out of the estate. She folded her hands again, as if hiding her feelings from those around her. The Duke recalled that the debts of Florence's family had been repaid. He wondered if Olivia would return to her family. A girl walked along a dark corridor and carried a flashlight in her hand. Candles dimly illuminated the passage. A strip of light leaked from under the door. Through the crack in the door, the girl began to eavesdrop. Male voices discussed the terms of the Duke of Parnell repaying the debts of her father, Viscount Florence. That he was giving something like a wedding gift to his future father-in-law. That's how the girl found out that her father was selling her. And I'm also glad that it's at such a high price. She just tightened her grip on the lantern's handle. Olivia's father, Viscount Florence, continued to cry that he will finally be able to use his children for the benefit of the family. Otherwise, they made too much noise in the house. The head of the family spoke to his guest, that it was clear from the face of the elder Mrs. Parnell that she did not really like his idea. The men laughed, and now Olivia understood that under no circumstances should she return back to this family, who simply sold her as a thing. She made a menacing face as she answered the Duke. What even if she is dying? Then she will never cross the threshold of her father's house again. Olivia said that the Duke had no need to be interested in her family. After all, they were more useless than cockroaches. The man said that the more he gets to know the girl, the more he begins to understand her. He had a discouraged expression on his face. He continued that he now sees how unhappy her life was. The Duke suggested changing the subject. He wanted to have a quiet breakfast in the company of a girl, and he warned her that he still had important matters that required his attention urgently. The maid came in. According to etiquette, she greeted the girl as her mistress, introduced herself but by name, and she said that it was her responsibility in this house. Our heroine noted to herself that the servants were already accustomed to calling her Madam. She smiled at the maid. She politely replied that she was pleased to meet you. The maid Romania told the girl that the tailor was already waiting for her, and she invited the lady to follow her. Our heroine was surprised, but the Duke said that she needed to appear before His Majesty, and he reminded her that all her clothes remained at the Parnell estate. Olivia recalled that His Majesty was looking forward to them, and even if they go now, they will probably be late. Duke Yang claimed that the Emperor was in excellent spirits, and waiting is so wonderful, so they might be a little late. At the same time, the man slowly sipped his tea, but a completely different image of His Highness surfaced in Olivia's memories. He didn't like being kept waiting. The girl saw that the Duke was stubborn as a sheep. Therefore, smiling, I decided to give in to him if so. She asked the maid to take her to the tailor. She nodded in agreement as a sign of her submission to the mistress. The girl followed the servants. The Duke brought up the rear. Olivia thought there was no need for him to watch the process. The maid Romania pointed the girl to the door, and she said that she should come here. Door opened. There was an expression of amazement and delight on our heroine's face. Outfits on mannequins, textiles, tailoring tools. Everything pleased the girl's eyes. A young tailor guy walked towards her, bowing. He greeted Madame Olivia politely. The girl smiled. She asked to be called Miss Florence. The guy asked her to pay attention to the dresses. She couldn't choose between pink and burgundy. The tailor asked if she wanted a dress to match the color of her eyes. He turned to the Duke, objecting to the girl's chosen color of the dress. But the girl objected that since they were not yet spouses, it makes no sense for the Duke and him to have similar outfits. Ian asked the tailor to take into account all of Olivia's wishes and do as she wants. A few hours later, the Duke's carriage was speeding down the street. The Emperor sent them a message, and now they were hurrying to the palace. Olivia sat by the window and was sad. She said she shouldn't have been late. She understood that the Emperor's words were important and should not be joked about. The man asked the girl what level of wealth the Duchy of Parnell had. I asked if it had become poor. Olivia took the question personally, and she clarified why the Duke didn't like her dress. She assured that she had chosen the most beautiful. She asked him to provide her with a comfortable life after the wedding. She convinced me to show her that she was not mistaken. The carriage drove across the bridge into the imperial garden at the palace, and the Duke sat thoughtfully. He tried to understand why Olivia was so strange. In the imperial palace, our heroine turned her head in different directions like an owl. The smiling emperor flew towards them. He admired the girl and said many pleasant words to her. His Majesty reached out to hug Olivia, but the Duke protected her from the unexpected embrace of the emperor. Our heroine got down on one knee and, according to tradition, decorously greeted His Majesty. The ruler asked to leave these formalities, and taking the girl by the hands, he asked her to get up from her knees. But the girl remembered that before he could answer all greetings with only a slightly noticeable nod of his head. His Majesty handed the girl the paper. Before starting their conversation, he asked the girl to sign this document. After reading it, Olivia's eyes widened in amazement, and many questions arose in her head. She held in her hands the marriage certificate of Duke Ian Tyrone and Olivia Florence. The Emperor's official seal was already in place. The only thing missing was his and the Duke's signatures. Our heroine and the Duke stood opposite His Highness. The palace servant stood with his head bowed behind the Emperor. The girl couldn't believe her eyes. She did not understand how the Emperor could put his seal without their signatures. That is, even before signing the document. She thought that His Highness was truly a man with a kind soul, and he waited with his fingers crossed for luck. Olivia turned to him with a question, with His Majesty's permission. He smiled graciously and let her know what she wanted. The girl said that she would not want unnecessary rumors when she gets divorced, and she asked me to help her somehow solve the problems with the Parnell house. The Emperor laughed heartily. The girl was scared, and Duke Yang simply frowned. The Emperor waved his hand at his servant, making a sign. He presented Olivia with a document. He said she shouldn't worry about rumors. After all, the Parnell family was the first to send all the necessary divorce documents. In fact, this was all on the orders of the Emperor himself. Our heroine couldn't believe her eyes. How quickly everything happened, and moreover completely painlessly for her. She studied the document carefully. It was indeed a certificate of dissolution of her marriage to the Duke of Parnell. The girl was happy, even at the suggestion of the Emperor himself. But everything happened faster than she could have expected. His Majesty claimed that this document was brought to him early this morning by a man from their duchy, and the Emperor was so worried that they might change their minds that I decided to immediately put my stamp on the document. The girl was happy. Her family hasn't changed at all, which is to be expected, and now she had nothing to regret. Neither about the heartless 3 mothers-in-law who hate her, nor about the soulless husband who does not love her. She boldly put her signature on the document of marriage with Duke Ian Tyrone. The Emperor's servant handed Duke Yang a document to sign, but he was in no hurry to take it into his own hands. Olivia looked over his shoulder. She was afraid that he still had doubts and might suddenly change his mind. She lightly pushed him in the side with her elbow and encouraged him to sign quickly. But the Duke openly ignored the girl and addressed himself to His Majesty. The Emperor broke into a smile. He said that he probably called him because he is the kindest person in the world. Duke John, with a straight face, clarified that he would not limit himself to just signing the certificate. But the Emperor will also organize a wedding for them. His Highness, pointing his finger at the couple, argued that the wedding ceremony was simply necessary, and it needs to be done as quickly as possible before the couple changes their minds, and he threatened to put them in shackles. But when the Emperor saw the fear in the girl's eyes, he smiled, and he said that this was just a formality. Ian made a thoughtful face and chuckled into his fist. In this case, he asked to allocate a diamond hall for their wedding. The diamond hall was one of the halls in the imperial palace, but it was the most famous and richly decorated. Everyone knew that ceremonies exclusively for royalty were held there. That's why the wedding celebration of Stathis and Romeo was organized there. Olivia was amazed that Duke Ian Tyrone wanted to hold their ceremony there. She looked first at one, then at the other, not imagining how this could even end. She was already preparing to defend the Duke from the Emperor's attacks and took a defensive position. His Majesty said with a slight shudder that the young man seemed to receive his consent, that he agrees to the wedding ceremony in the diamond hall of the palace. He began to cuddle the Duke like a child. The Emperor spoke into the Duke's ear, that if he were a weakling and impotent, he would not have achieved his goal. Olivia couldn't understand what goal they were talking about, and the Duke was panting from the emotional stress he had experienced. His Majesty said that he was planning the wedding for next week, and he promised to ask the Empress to help with the preparations. The Duke and Olivia bowed to the Emperor, in every possible way verbally expressing signs of gratitude to His Highness. Duke Ian Tyrone and Olivia Florent were now spouses, blessed by the Emperor himself. It was already evening. The sun's last rays painted the castle in sunset colors. Olivia and Ian had just left the palace and were hurrying along the garden path towards their carriage. The girl tried to put the puzzles of her experiences during the day into a picture. She recalled that the Emperor asked to take care of his dear nephew. She looked sideways at the Duke and realized that she did not have the necessary information and situation at all. Also, the nature of the relationship and mutual understanding between His Majesty and Duke Tyrone remained a mystery to her. The man asked the girl what worried her so much. What's wrong with her? She didn't answer him, but absolutely everything was wrong for her. After a while, she replied that she was alarmed that his uncle cared so much about him and was worried about him. The Duke said that this was not his fault at all. The girl nodded her head in response. He said that the Emperor had come up with something for himself, and now he's raving about his imaginary problems. That lately he had been bored and his mood was getting worse. The girl said that he was in vain. After all, His Majesty loves him so much and is concerned about his problems. The Duke answered in an absolutely indifferent voice that it was so, and he began to sigh to himself. The man said that now they need to determine how they will address each other. Olivia replied that we could leave everything as it was. The man stood opposite the girl and straightened her hair from her shoulders. He said, looking into her eyes, "Beloved wife." Something suddenly exploded in the girl's head. Her ex-husband called her wife, and this did not bring back her most rosy memories. Her heart began to pound heavily in her chest. She asked to call her anything but that. The Duke's face showed confusion and surprise. He chuckled to himself and thought. He leaned over and suggested what else she could be called, and he quietly said to her as she left, "Olivia." The girl's emotions went wild. Strange sounds appeared in my head. She jumped back from the man, and she asked me not to whisper in her ear anymore. He bowed politely and said that if his wife so wishes. The girl interrupted him and asked not to call her that again, that it annoys her. The man laughed openly, and the girl looked angry and dissatisfied. The Duke pretended to have guessed something, which caused Olivia even greater indignation. A flock of geese flew against the background of the setting sun. He extended his hand to her as if inviting her to come with him. The girl timidly gave him her hand. So they walked on, holding hands along the path of the imperial garden. Soon after the events described, a letter arrived from the imperial palace with an official seal. It reported that the wedding ceremony would take place in 2 weeks. And in order to have everything in time for the celebration, the mansion and palace began to bustle with activity, and the maid in charge of the Duke's house arranged everything for the mistress. And Olivia had the impression that she was the only one messing around here. She opened the door with a creak. I looked into the Duke's office. He was sitting at a desk with business papers. She asked him to leave things to her. She promised to do everything herself. The girl extended her hand and intended to take the writing pen from the man. The man was surprised, and Olivia looked at him with wide eyes and smiled. The girl leaned her hands on the table. She assured the Duke that she had experience in business, that she used to handle business papers as the Duchess of Parnell. The man tried to object to her something. She brought her face closer to the man, and she repeated what she had said, that she had a similar experience. It's just that the Empress put all the preparations for the wedding on her own shoulders. Olivia giggled. She jokingly expressed gratitude to the one who decided to hold the ceremony in the Diamond Hall, and she absolutely agreed that this was the best place for a celebration in their honor. The Duke spent some time wondering what to do, but then he simply said briefly that in that case he would go from here. The man asked the maid Romagna to take care of the Duchess. She obligingly bowed to him as a sign of submission. Olivia said goodbye to the Duke, She told him that they would meet later and smiled sweetly at him. The girl turned to leave him, but the Duke called her by name. She froze in place and even shuddered a little. Olivia got goosebumps, but she didn't show it, and she turned to the man with a smile, listening to him carefully. The man stood up to meet her. He asked the girl to forgive him. The Duke approached and began to brush the hair from Olivia's face. He was gentle and caring with her, and the face expressed complete concentration. He said her hair was a little out of order, but the girl was angry. She answered sharply that he could have simply told her about it. The man made an excuse that the girl couldn't see her face, but it wasn't difficult for him at all. Olivia wanted to answer something sarcastic, but I realized that arguing with the Duke is not easy. She gave up, she thanked the man, and she said that now she should get to work. Olivia left the office stomping loudly, and the maid Romania followed her. When the door closed behind the girl, the man began to smile, pleased with himself, and the girl stood with her back against the door and took a breath. The maid was nearby, ready to help her mistress at any moment. The sky was already illuminated by many stars, and our heroine was still working with business papers. She asked Romania to contact the Parnell family, so that they return her things before the wedding. The maid was surprised. She assured the lady that those people might not like it. Olivia replied that she needed her wedding dress and jewelry. She seemed to be silently complaining about a headache. She asked to offer to buy her things, but to offer a minimum price. I thought that you shouldn't be particularly generous with them. Romania expressed a warning to the lady. If a girl wants to dress up in her old wedding dress again, in which she last got married, it was worth thinking about this. Olivia's response was that they had little time left to make a new one, and I thought it was a waste of time. She was going to do a little alteration and the dress would look completely different. Romania sadly reminded the girl that wearing an old dress to a wedding is a bad omen. Olivia was deep in thought, but the girl realized that her first marriage ended in divorce, even though she was wearing a new dress, and she continued to endure in order to save the marriage. She did not have a cozy family hearth at all, and these 3 mothers-in-law and her ex-husband turned her life into hellish torment. Therefore, the girl brushed off the maid's warnings that these were just signs, and this dress will not affect her happy future in any way, and she will find happiness if she can save time and money. A few days later, a maid brought a jewelry box and her wedding dress to the girl. Attached to all of this was a letter from the Parnell estate. They wrote to her that they would not bargain, but would accept the price offered. It was said that many of her things were thrown away, and what is left is returned to her. The girl grinned imperceptibly and crumpled the letter. The maid was surprised by the mistress's mood and her actions. In fact, the reason for writing that letter was one thing. The girl got it from her mother. Our heroine's family was poor, and the girl had nothing to take as a dowry, and all she could get was that necklace. It was a reminder of her dear and beloved, but already deceased mother. The girl was glad that she managed to buy him back, but it could have ended up in the trash like the rest of her things. At this point, the girl was going to say goodbye to the Parnell family she hated. It was a starry night outside. The door to the girl's room opened with a treacherous creak. He didn't bother her. She did not wake up even when a strip of light from the crack of the opening door fell on her face. Duke Yang looked at the sleeping girl. The girl snored, not suspecting anything. The man tried to figure out for himself who this young girl was. Her actions were abnormal. She had a funny and awkward smile, but at the same time she behaved with dignity. She was nice and polite. She strictly followed the rules of court etiquette. One got the impression that she belongs in secular society and feels quite confident and free. The man was investigating the girl, and they said the same thing about her, that she is not talkative and polite, that at the academy she was a modest student and did not particularly stand out. He found out that during her studies the girl made a couple of friends. Among them was Romeo Alcestis. She studied at the Faculty of Accounting, but I never studied court etiquette. The man verified the veracity of the girl's words, that the Parnell family didn't value her, and the Duke did not pay any attention to her at all. Everything said that the girl knew nothing about high society, that she is modest and calm. But something was wrong. The Duke tried to understand who she really was. He noticed the girl's decoration. The maid said that of all the things that arrived from the Duchy of Parnell, the girl took only one for herself. It seemed like Olivia valued him more than anyone else. The Duke appreciated the girl's intelligence. After all, she was able to hide this thing behind the purchase of a wedding dress. He thought it was a good move. The man's face was pleased. He quietly asked who dared to call her that. with the hope that it is not the same man who gave her this jewelry. The Duke touched the jewelry that Olivia treasured so much. He quietly said, as if to himself, that he was really looking forward to their wedding. A week later, pairs of ladies and gentlemen walked to the palace. There were also lonely guests. Everyone was smart and cheerful, and our heroine sat at the dressing table and preened herself. She was already wearing her wedding dress, veil, and jewelry. She was a little scared. She reassured herself that this was already her second wedding. The decoration of the late mother was with the girl as her amulet. The girl was sad. She remembered her first wedding. She was terrible and lonely. Her hands were shaking. She didn't know whether this family life would be different from the previous one. The Duke groom quietly entered her room. He always wore a white suit, but today he was simply magnificent. The man took the girl's shoulder with his hand. She was suddenly frightened and screamed. Olivia looked over her shoulder at her husband. He noticed that her breathing was hoarse. The Duke touched her face and hands. The girl's sickly appearance bothered him. Her face was red and swollen, and my heart beat faster in my chest.